God's dwelling place. The story of Jacob and his dream of the angels moving from the earth to the sky and back again has always intrigued me. And his realization upon waking that he exclaims, "Surely God was in this place and I didn't know it." How many times in our lives of faith have we exclaimed similar words? For me, in the midst of the breakup of my first marriage and divorce, and through the early months of grief and disbelief and the demands of toddlers and a master's degree, I would shake my head when grace entered in and would say, "Surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it." Perhaps for you, undergoing surgery, and as the anesthetic begins its stupefying work and the blurry moment when the doctor says, "We got everything," you might have uttered, "Surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it." When the last breath is exhaled and the vigil has ended, and the circle of family at bedside take a breath and the tears begin to fall, you might have heard the words, "Surely God was in this place, and we didn't know it." The sun rises over the tree line, and light shimmers over the glass surface lake, and the loon calls across the water. And the sigh from the depth of your being speaks in a whisper, "Surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it." As a human race, we are more familiar with lives on the move, going from here to there, following the seasons, the river, the moving herds that put meat in our stomachs and fur on our backs. At some point, like Jacob's followers, we settled, laid the foundation stone, and learned how to live in one place as one people. The idea of having to move, to be displaced, became a nightmare out of necessity or oppression or fear. Staying put was the ultimate of having arrived, of stability and structure, of safety and belonging. In our modern day, we see families risking all on leaky boats or suffocating tractor trailers, seeking asylum, crossing illegally across the border, seeking new lives from what has been familiar because home is no longer safe. As we humans settled and laid down roots, so did our faith look for structure, form, and foundation. First, a few stones stacked together, then larger stones and temples, then churches and bricks and steeples. God's house was the center of the community. As Barbara Brown Taylor writes in An Altar in the World, God had a permanent address. And so God became housed where we could visit and worship and pray together. And gathering together is good, to share with others our prayers, our faith, our songs, our praises, to know that we are not alone, to know that our lives have meaning and purpose. Yet somewhere along the line, the walls and the structure that were meant to house and offer a place, an identity, became for some a prison, and walls that kept some out and others in, a place of division rather than unity. This passage from Genesis reminds me that in the beginning, just as in the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve walked, talked, and shared sacred space with the divine without even clothes to separate them, that the holy, unnameable mystery we know as God was there, was always there, will always be there, but often we don't know it. In Taylor's words, the whole world is the house of God. She writes, "Human beings may separate things into as many piles as we wish, separating spirit from flesh, sacred from secular, church from world. But we should not be surprised when God does not recognize the distinctions that we make between the two. Earth is so thick with divine possibility that it is a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars. Jacob's nowhere, about which he knew nothing, turned out to be the house of God. And even though his family had imploded, even though he was a scoundrel from the word go, God decided to visit Jacob right where he was. Though Jacob had not been right about anything so far and never would be, think Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Greencoat, God gave Jacob vision, so Jacob could see the angels going up and down from earth to heaven, going about their business in the one and only world there is. The vision showed Jacob something he did not know. He slept in the house of God. He woke at the gate of heaven. None of this was his doing. The only thing he did right was to see where he was and say so. Surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it. One of the most common scriptures read at funerals is the passage from John that Luis read for us. In my Father's house there are many rooms. So much of our Christian faith has been based on the idea of a heaven and hell, who's in and who's out. These words promising a safe place in heaven were incredibly important, meaningful, and comforting for many, even today. The one thing about these words I'd like to challenge is the location of such a dwelling place. This metaphor was used to describe a place of belonging and security. The room in a house was an easy way for the listener to understand and relate to that kind of hospitality and security. It was one example. It might have been an image of a comfortable chair, a warm hug, a place at a table, a bed to rest. Whatever the image, Jesus is trying to reassure the disciples that in God's presence, there is no us or them. There is no separation, banishment, or sleeping outside the city gate where there is danger and even death. In God's presence, we are home, and there is room for all. We are sheltered. We are loved and cared for, and the address is irrelevant. For God is with us where we are, and we need not fear. Whether in a stable stall, in a bed of straw, or in the highest temple, or a grove of olive trees, Jesus spoke, God is with us. In our homes, in our streets, at the office, in the hospital bed or prison cell, surely God is in that place, even if we don't know it. The chapter of Barbara Brown Taylor's book where she speaks of Jacob's story, she calls the practice of paying attention. In our world today, it is so difficult to pay attention. There is so much to distract us. Have you ever driven along the road on the way somewhere and arrive and think, I'm not sure how I got here? Could I possibly have gone through a red light? Did I miss that stop sign? I don't think so, but I really don't remember. That's one reason why I enjoy walking so much. It forces me to slow down and start to notice things, like the neighbor's dog, or perhaps the new puppy, or the person who always has their walker parked outside their front door ready to go, or the new plantings in the garden at the corner. When I'm driving by, I don't always notice those kinds of things. Even with my sunroof, I can't always see the stars at night or the harvest moon or the amber sunrise because I can't take my eyes off the road to look. How many of us have witnessed families around a restaurant table, each with their noses deep in their electronic device and no conversation or connection shared other than through the electronic device? As entertaining and sometimes educational television can be, it too can be a distraction. I think we have to be really intentional today about paying attention. It has to be practiced. We have to make time for it. In a book I read while on sabbatical called Born to Walk, it talked about the fact that we as humans are really designed to go at a walking pace. It's how we were built. It's the speed at which we were born to live. To go at such a fast pace that we do and often are challenged to do these days, it's not really how we were meant to go. I do practice walking every day. I take time to breathe, slow my pace if I find myself going too fast, and you can kind of tell what stress level I'm at by the pace of my steps. So I'll stop and I'll sit on a park bench overlooking the Speed River, and I'll watch the ducks and the geese, and I try to notice the color of the flowers and the sounds of the birds, and I notice the squirrels leaping from tree to tree and the branches suspended above me. I notice the folk who have used the picnic table as a shelter overnight. I see the same young couple hurling expletives at each other, either high on drugs or low in self-respect and worth. I watch the sun disappear behind the tree line as it sets for the evening. I stop and smell the buds and flowers. Sometimes I'll pick a piece of cedar off of a bush as I walk along and take in its strong fragrance. I try to pay attention. I try to see the world as the divine space it is and feel grateful. Even on my dreariest and most tiring and demanding days, I try to give thanks for life and the wonders of the world and my place in it. And in those moments, it is as if I see the scurry of angels up and down ladders from the sky to the earth, and I say to myself, surely God is in this place, and I didn't even know it. God's dwelling place cannot be limited by our own perception of where we think God is to be found. God truly is in all things. When we allow ourselves to only see God in those places that we have labeled godly places, then we greatly limit our experience of God. Often it is only in looking back upon our lives that we recognize God's presence at different times, as described in that familiar poem that many of us have heard, Footprints. God, where were you? Where were those footprints in the sand? I was walking alone, and God says, that's the time when I carried you. Or in Elizabeth Barrett Browning's words, earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush of fire with God. But only those who see take off their shoes. The rest sit around it and pluck berries. We need only open our eyes to see that surely God is in this place, and perhaps we will know it. May it be so. Amen.